They thought I was dead. Legally, I was. My parents forged the documents, filed the certificate, and held a funeral without a body, just so they could cut me out of the family trust. But they never expected me to walk into the will reading, alive, calm, and holding the paperwork that gave me back everything they stole. Hi, I'm Emily. Or at least, that's who I used to be. Have you ever had to prove you existed just to claim what was rightfully yours? I'd love to hear. Have you ever been betrayed by the people meant to protect you? Drop your thoughts below, because sometimes the quietest revenge is showing up when they least expect it. They called me the pride of the Davenport name, the one who brought grace to the family. At 17, I stood at the center of our estate's grand ballroom, the chandeliers above scattering light like falling stars. My name echoed in the speeches of judges and senators, friends of my father who shook my hand too tightly and smiled too briefly. She'll go far, they said. She's got the look of a leader. I smiled until my cheeks ached. My mother had picked the white dress. Angels wear white, she whispered while smoothing the sleeves that morning. At the time, I thought she meant purity, grace, maybe even pride. Now I know better. Angels wear white before they're buried. Dinner was lobster with drawn butter, served on fine china with linen napkins folded like swans. I barely touched mine. The heat clung to my skin beneath the silk fabric, but I kept smiling, kept performing. After the final toast, I slipped away from the crowd to find my diploma. I'd left it in the study next to the fireplace. That room had always been off limits during events, but no one noticed me disappear. No one ever noticed when I left. As I pushed open the heavy oak door, I stopped cold. Voices filtered through the hallway from the adjacent parlor, my father's first, sharp and low. She leaves tonight. Papers are filed. Certificates in the system. I froze. The word certificate made my stomach twist. My mother's voice followed, cool and steady. Guardianship revoked. Everything is signed. No one will question it. We'll have her declared legally dead by morning. My diploma slipped from my fingers. Then came the words that broke whatever image I still held of us. She was for optics. The campaign needed a family. She played her part. Now it's Caleb's time. There was silence. Then a whisper from my father. It's cleaner this way. I stepped into the room before I even realized I was moving. What are you talking about? They turned, not startled, not guilty, just mildly inconvenienced. My father, in his pressed gray suit, looked at me like I was a problem he'd already solved. Emily, he said calmly, you weren't supposed to hear that. Margot adjusted the pearl pin on her collar without looking up. You were adopted, darling, for image. You performed well, but that season's past. You raised me, I whispered, though my voice barely belonged to me. And we provided, she said. You were an arrangement. I felt something tear cleanly inside me, not loud, not chaotic, just a snap. You forged papers? Told the state I was dead? My father straightened his tie. Missing. Presumed dead. It's neater that way. I just graduated, My voice cracked. You were impressive, my mother said, still not looking at me. But that doesn't make you blood. They turned away. The light dimmed behind them as they walked out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my diploma with shaking hands and walked upstairs one final time. Not as a daughter, not as a Davenport, but as something ghost-like. I didn't pack much. Just my backpack, a half-folded birth certificate with a crease down the middle like a scar, and the adoption file I'd once read out of curiosity. By the time I reached the front gates, the marble floors were behind me. The air outside was thick with summer, the cicadas buzzing like static in my ears. No one followed, not even the family dog. As I walked down the road, my shoes rubbed blisters into my heels. I didn't look back. Not when the estate lights faded behind me, not when the wind shifted and brought the smell of roses from the garden, not even when I passed the family portrait at the hallway's end, the one where my smile looked real and theirs didn't, because Emily Davenport died that night. But I didn't. I didn't cry when I left the estate, not when the gates shut behind me, not when the night swallowed me whole, not even when I handed over 47 crumpled dollars for a one-way ticket to Chicago and waited alone in the Greyhound station, arms wrapped around my backpack like it held my entire life. Because it did. The bus ride was 18 hours long. I didn't sleep. I watched the country unfold through dusty windows, miles of road signs, dark fields, and gas stations that blinked like lighthouses in the dark. No one sat beside me. I don't think they knew what to make of the girl who never blinked and never spoke. When I arrived at Union Station, the city was already awake. Horns blared, pigeons scavenged in packs, and I, dressed in a sweat-drenched white dress and carrying a ghost's name, slipped into the women's bathroom and locked myself in the farthest stall. That first night, I curled up on the cold tile floor, my head resting on my rolled-up hoodie. A janitor passed once. I held my breath until he left. No one said anything, not even me. The second night, a woman in red heels walked in, paused mid-lipstick, and glanced down at me without blinking. "Don't die, stupid," she muttered, then walked out. I didn't plan to die. But I hadn't planned to survive like this either. By day, I wandered. My shoes tore into my heels, and the only food I found came from scraps behind bakeries too busy to care. I sipped from public fountains and counted coins from a coffee cup someone had tossed aside. By the fifth day, I found myself outside a soup kitchen on 49th and Halstead, staring too long at a bulletin board filled with torn flyers. Shelter beds full, phone numbers scratched out. One ad read, "Need a job? Try surviving first." I stared at that line like it knew me. "You lost," someone said behind me, "or just looking." I turned. A woman stood there, arms crossed over a faded purple sweater, her eyes sharp and tired. She held a paper plate with overcooked beans and dry rice. She offered it without another word. I took it, sat on the curb, ate with plastic cutlery that cracked at the edges. She didn't ask my name. But when I showed up the next day, she handed me a mop and said, "Storage room's got a cot. You clean, you stay. Deal?" I nodded. My voice had forgotten how to come out. Her name was Rosa. She'd been a social worker once before the funding got slashed. "Now I feed the forgotten," she said, scrubbing pots while I swept the floor, "and I can spot a discarded daughter from a block away." That night, I slept behind the storage crates, a wool blanket over my shoulders and a sliver of moonlight slicing across the cement floor. The ache in my stomach had dulled, replaced by something sharper, something like quiet determination. A week later, Rosa got me a janitorial job at a small law firm downtown. "Don't talk, just clean, and keep your ears open," she said, stuffing gloves into my hands. "People in suits are sloppy with secrets." The office was glass and tile, cold and quiet after hours. I scrubbed toilets, emptied trash bins, and swept up arguments still echoing off the walls. Some nights, I found discarded memos, shredded trust documents, half-signed contracts. I didn't understand most of it, but I took notes. Copied down words I didn't know. I stole dictionaries from the break room shelf. I learned. The bleach stung my hands. The copy machine hummed like a lullaby at midnight. My feet ached, but my mind started clicking into place. At 2:13 a.m. on a Thursday, I sat in the break room with a lukewarm cup of cheap coffee and opened the red notebook Rosa had given me. Its pages were blank, but mine were about to begin. I wrote 3 words at the top of the first page, slow and careful, east-west. The name settled in my chest like a key finally turning. No one notices the cleaning girl, and that made me dangerous. Each night after the last partner left and the city exhaled into the hum of streetlights and buses, I slipped into my routine, gloves on, mop bucket full, eyes open. The firm sat on the 15th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown. All the surfaces gleamed, and the silence was deep enough to swallow secrets. I started memorizing patterns. Who left contracts face up? Which assistants forgot to lock file drawers when the copy machine spat out forgotten drafts? Trash became my textbook. I'd empty bins filled with shredded client memos and half-torn trust agreements. I'd tape some of them back together in the break room and copy the language into my red notebook. Words like irrevocable, codicil, executrix. I didn't know exactly what they meant at first, but I learned, piece by piece. Rosa would quiz me in the mornings while we cleaned the soup kitchen. "What's a beneficiary loophole?" she'd ask, scrubbing pans. "A clause that lets money bypass inheritance tax," I'd reply, rinsing dishes. She'd nod like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. By late 2018, snow had started falling on the corners of Chicago like salt. I'd finish my shifts with blisters on my heels and legal terminology swirling in my head. During the day, I'd haunt the law section of the public library. I never stayed long, just enough to cross-reference what I'd overheard. One afternoon, Rosa introduced me to a woman from the shelter. She had 2 grocery bags full of paperwork and eyes like shattered glass. Her name was Doreen. Her mother was disabled, and a distant cousin was trying to petition for control over the small house they lived in. "She needs help," Rosa said. "The real kind." I sat with Doreen on a bench outside the kitchen and sorted through her documents. Guardianship denials, missed court dates. I didn't promise anything. I wasn't licensed and I wasn't naive, but I filled out the right forms, found a legal clinic willing to file on her behalf, and coached her through what to say. 3 weeks later, she came back crying. She'd won. After that, people started whispering, quiet referrals. The girl at Rosa's might help. They came with folders stained with coffee and panic. I didn't ask questions. I just listened. I never advertised. I never posted online. But word spread, and I kept building. In February 2019, with money I'd saved from late-night cleaning jobs and envelope cash clients gave in gratitude, I rented a P.O. box and walked into a secondhand store on Halstead. The blazer was navy, a little too big in the shoulders, but the sleeves hit right at the wrist. I tried it on in front of a cracked mirror and saw someone I hadn't met before, someone I could trust to speak for me. That night, I registered eWest Consulting using a borrowed laptop at the library. The website was plain. No photo, no name, just services listed under estate structuring and private trust review. I closed my red notebook with a steady hand and walked back into the chill of early spring. At home, behind Rosa's kitchen, a new envelope waited for me. No return address, thick paper. The kind that meant old money. Inside was a single sentence, "Seeking discreet external consultant, urgent trust restructuring, Charleston." I stared at the city's name until it stopped being a word and became a challenge. The gates of the Davenport estate looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the angle, or maybe it was because I wasn't looking up this time. I didn't wait for them to open slowly like they used to. The driver pulled forward once the code was entered, tires crunching over the gravel circle like a verdict. I stepped out of the black SUV in a navy blazer and heels that bit into the pavement. The autumn air held the faint scent of dying roses, and the sycamore trees lining the walkway had started to turn gold. I had walked this path hundreds of times before, always through the side entrance, always silent, small, careful. But that was before. The young intern met me at the door, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking nervously between my face and the initials on my briefcase. She couldn't have been older than 22. "Ms. West," she said, voice too high. "The board is waiting." I nodded. "Then let's not keep them." We walked past the grand piano I used to dust, past the portraits I was never in, past the sunroom where I once read under orders to stay out of sight. Nothing had changed. Not the smell of lemon polish, not the way the hall echoed behind heels, not the silence that made everything feel breakable. The double doors to the boardroom opened, and there they were. Richard Davenport, still crisp in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp with calculation. Margot, hair perfectly pinned, a brooch glinting on her collar like armor. And Blake, slouched in a leather chair, phone in hand, barely pretending to care. For a beat, no one moved. Then Richard stood. "Ms. West," he said, "we appreciate your discretion." I returned his handshake. His grip faltered, a second too long. "Let's begin," he offered, gesturing to the head of the table. I set down my briefcase and clicked it open. The sound was small, but final. "I've reviewed the portfolio," I said calmly. "But before we begin, I believe 3 documents require clarification." I pulled out the first sheet and slid it across the polished table. Death certificate, filed August 2017, Emily Davenport, presumed deceased. No follow-up investigation. The air shifted. Margot's fingers stopped tapping. I laid the second document beside it. Adoption records. Emily Rose Harper, renamed Davenport in 2005. Guardian, Richard and Margot Davenport. Status, revoked. Blake leaned forward. "What is this?" I pulled out the third page. Thicker paper, notarized. "Transfer of ownership," I said. "Davenport Holdings, 51%, acquired through subsidiaries over the last 18 months. Richard's voice dropped. "Who are you?" I looked him in the eye. "I'm the girl you buried," I said softly, "and the woman who just walked back into your boardroom." Margot's lips parted. No sound came out. Blake stood abruptly, chair scraping wood. "You can't just walk in here and take everything." "I already did." Richard's hand trembled as he reached for the documents. "This isn't legal." "It's airtight," I said. "And I didn't come here for revenge, Senator. I came for control. You're hemorrhaging assets. Your public filings are under quiet investigation. You need restructuring. You just didn't realize it would come from me." Margot's voice cracked. "This is a shakedown." "No," I said. "This is a consultation." I let the silence stretch, watching them try to fill it. Then I leaned forward, folding my hands. "You want to save this legacy?" I asked. "Then you'll do it by my terms." No one spoke. Even Blake sat down again, his face suddenly pale. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the stained glass window. Inside, all that remained was stillness and power. The room was too quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the sort that lands after a verdict. Outside, Charleston skies had turned the color of wet cement. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printer toner and polished wood. I sat at the head of the conference table, hands resting gently on a black leather folio. Across from me, Richard tapped his fingers against the edge of his water glass. Margot kept her hands clasped tightly on her lap, her nails digging into her gloves. Blake hadn't looked up since I walked in. The legal assistant entered quietly and set down a small stack of papers, then retreated without a word. Her eyes flicked to me once before the door clicked shut behind her. "I assume you've reviewed the draft," I said. Richard cleared his throat. "We have concerns." "You always do when control leaves your hands." His jaw tensed. Margot's eyes flicked toward him, waiting. I unfolded the folio and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. 3 conditions, I said, my voice calm but final. First, Blake is permanently removed from all positions of financial authority. No advisory roles, no shadow accounts, no fallback funding. Blake scoffed without looking up. "You can't do that." "I already did. This is the paperwork to make it official." Richard leaned forward. "You're dismantling our legacy." "No," I replied. "I'm saving it from collapse. Second, both of you retire, effective immediately. No honorary boards, no speaking engagements, no media appearances. This family will step out of the spotlight it abused." Margot flinched slightly, then smoothed her skirt like she could iron out the discomfort. "And third," I continued, "you release a public statement acknowledging the truth, that I was unjustly erased from this family and that Davenport Holdings owes its continued existence to the daughter it tried to bury. Richard pushed back from the table. You want an apology. Number Y want the truth. Documented, dated, signed. You're bluffing, he said. This entire maneuver, shell companies, stake transfers, it'll crumble under federal review. I leaned forward, unzipping a second folder. Then let's test it. I have 3 investigators on hold and a forensic accountant reviewing your last 7 years of filings. We can turn this into a court case by lunch, or you can sign and let this stay private. The room held its breath. Margot glanced at Blake, then at Richard. She opened her mouth, closed it. Richard, she said softly, she has us cornered. He didn't respond. I stood. You buried me once, I said, voice even, but I learned to breathe underground. Now I'm the one holding the oxygen. They signed. No dramatic speeches, no breakdowns, just the cold sound of pen on paper and the soft hiss of breath leaving Richard's chest when it was done. I slid the documents back into the folio and stood. The room felt smaller now, the light dimmer. As I turned to leave, Blake finally looked up. Is that it? He asked. For you? Yes. I walked past the assistant waiting by the door. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. As I passed, she whispered almost to herself, was that really her? I didn't stop walking. I didn't nod. I didn't say yes or no. I just let the silence answer for me. Because some power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from being heard without ever raising your voice. There was no wind that morning, just light, soft and steady, spilling through the branches of the old sycamore tree. The garden behind the estate was quieter than I remembered. Clean stone paths, newly planted rose beds, trimmed hedges. It didn't feel like a return. It felt like a reclamation. The camera crews were already setting up when I arrived. No flashes, no tabloid vans, just quiet local media, a few documentary types, and a handful of legal reporters. They knew not to expect a spectacle. This wasn't about drama. It was about dignity. The podium had been set up facing the tree line, rows of white folding chairs stretched down the lawn, occupied by people who understood more than most. Social workers, former clients, community organizers, survivors of systems that never gave them space to begin with. Rosa stood near the edge, her lavender dress catching the light. Her hands were clasped in front of her, sunglasses perched low on her nose, hiding eyes that I knew were watching everything. She took the stage first. We spend too much time trying to fix broken things, she said. Some things need to be replaced, and some people need the freedom to rebuild from scratch. A pause. Then she glanced at me. She didn't rebuild the house, Rosa said. She rewrote the blueprint. There was no applause, not because they weren't moved, but because some moments are too full to be interrupted. I stepped up next, keeping my notes folded in one hand. I didn't read them. 5 years ago, I began, I was told I didn't exist. A few heads nodded, but what they didn't understand was this. Being erased doesn't mean being empty. It means you're free to fill that space with something new. I gestured toward the newly restored stone bench beneath the sycamore. It had been cleaned, reinforced, and fitted with a bronze plaque. We walked together to unveil it, Rosa beside me, steady and still. The cloth slipped off with a whisper. The engraving was simple. In memory of the children they tried to erase, and the legacies they couldn't. The garden was silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Reporters raised their hands gently, 1 or 2 questions hanging in the air. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned toward the tree, walked past the stone bench, and let the soft crunch of gravel mark my steps. That was the spot I used to sit in alone, the place where I first read books to escape the world, and now it was mine. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I built the kind of life that earned it back on my own terms. Behind me, I heard a camera shutter, then another, and then nothing but wind in the leaves. Rosa caught up to me slowly, resting a hand on my arm. You okay? I'm not angry anymore, I said quietly. I just don't need their story to explain mine. She nodded, eyes soft. Then I'd say you're free. As guests began to gather near the tables for coffee and quiet conversation, I stepped away from the noise, letting it drift behind me. I looked down at the foundation folder tucked beneath my arm. West Davenport Legal Aid Initiative. No pictures of me on the website, no mention of bloodlines, just results. Quiet victories, clean contracts, lives rerouted instead of erased. Some people build empires to be remembered. Others build them so no one else gets forgotten. I never needed their last name. I wrote my own and signed it where it mattered. Under the sycamore tree, where I once sat alone with borrowed books and bruised hope, I finally left behind the weight of needing their love. I didn't come back to punish them. I came to build something they couldn't take from me. Sometimes the most powerful healing doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from knowing you were always enough. In a world quick to discard those who don't fit, quiet resilience can speak louder than inheritance. If this story reminded you of a time you had to rebuild from nothing or helped you see someone else's struggle with new eyes, I'd be honored to hear what it stirred in you.